right, hi everyone. I'll try do it in 10 minutes so we can get back on time. So I was invited to speak about trends and features of surveillance capitalism, which has two components. There's the surveillance, which doesn't necessarily have to be by a corporation, but in this case, we'll be talking about the logic of capitalism. Okay, so I guess let's start by talking about profit, because that's what drives corporations. Companies are collecting and selling personal data for profit, not for the benefit of a user or a community. Now, a company might be dishonest and it might say it's collecting this data so it can optimize your user experience. Maybe they're a social media app. They could just be any functional app. It could be an app that helps you track your periods if you're a person that menstruates, for instance, which is a famous example that's used. But behind the scenes, that company can't make money off the app, especially if it's free. So in order for it to make money, it will sell your data to those that might want to use it. And so the famous phrase is, if an app is free, you are the product, sort of. But the important thing here is companies only do this because underlying their operation is a for-profit motive. You could be a periods tracking app and not want to make money. You could just be a bunch of programmers that believe that people should be able to track their menstruation and design an app and then release it for free. That sort of free software does exist. So software being free and monetarily free in this case doesn't necessarily mean that it's collecting data. But if it's done by a for-profit corporation, chances are if they're going to be profitable, they're going to be collecting your data. And they won't be doing it for your benefit. They'll be doing it for the benefit of their clients, who's the people that they're collecting data for. Companies are also very dishonest about what data they're collecting, how they process that data, where they store it, and who they sell it to. The big example of this was the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. So what happened here was there was this app on Facebook that was distributed. You know how you have those games you can play on Facebook? And I believe it was a personality app where you give them information about who you are so they can give you a psychological profile and tell you a bit about your personality. You might have seen those online quizzes that will tell you which character you are of a TV show, or it's also really popular with New Age philosophy for people to be involved in birth charts for astrology. And a lot of that requires personal information because it is a personal profile. So what looks like an innocent program or app that you're using, web program, that's just going to tell you something useful about yourself, it's actually taking a lot of that information. And then what Facebook did is they sold it to the British firm Cambridge Analytica, and Cambridge Analytica was using that for political advertising and other political purposes. And the full scale of what is used with that data still isn't known. What we know now is happened chance because of good reporting, because of inquiries by state, and sometimes because of leaks. We won't always know what happens with data, especially when that data is passed in ways that are very difficult to track to clientele. But I think the important thing here is lots of people were very innocent in the sense that they didn't know that their data would be used to give them political ads during a presidential election that was happening in the United States at the time. They just wanted a psychological profile. They just wanted to engage with their birth charts and astrology and the important things that people find meaningful. Behind the scenes, however, Facebook was doing things and they were lying about it, and they weren't being honest about the fact that they would be studying that data. Now, a lot of this happens because we rely on large tech companies. You've got the big five: Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. Because we're so reliant on these tech companies, it's very easy for them to create large data collection protocols and systems, and it's difficult for us to challenge them and to just move away. And that reliance also makes it easy for them to be dishonest, to lie to regulators, to lie to us as users, and to not have to tell us the truth, and to cover up instances where they're collecting data without us knowing. Now, of course, if we look at just surveillance as a concept, there are instances where communities seem to want surveillance. So we worked on a project at the University of the Free State that I was attending. They had a big issue with gender-based violence and other related aspects of violence on campus. And they wanted to install security cameras around the campus because they thought that that would assist in some way. Then I also did some work on a ward committee here in Mangung Metro Municipality in Ward 23. There was also a project to increase security cameras, and they worked with private companies and the municipality. And communities got behind that because in the mind of the communities, these cameras would make them safer. But working with for-profit companies, and yes, it is true, providing security to people could be profitable, but providing security is only profitable to people that are paying you to provide security. But just a random camera on the street isn't technically making money. So what a lot of these corporations did is use these cameras to collect data and sell that data, because that would actually give them money. So if you're putting up a camera and it's assisting a social issue, right, and a company's not making money out of that, and it's a tech company, you can already start to think that perhaps data collection is what's inviting that tech company to be involved. In one of the companies that were involved was ADT. It's a private security company here in Bloemfontein. And so there's this unintended disconnect between what communities are fighting for and what the corporation ends up actually doing with the service, to the point where if a corporation's only interest in putting up that security camera is not to solve crime because they're making money, but to sell data, they might even ignore all the crime that's happening unless it assists with their bottom line. And that's what ended up happening. And then obviously other interests like using cameras to address protests and so forth and criminalize comes in with interest of state and police. But if we just focus on corporations for now, the underlying problem is the for-profit motive combines with surveillance to collect data, but not to help us. Surveillance is not profitable technically. So it's the data collection that is. Now, what are some issues with surveillance? Obviously, in the long run, is that it limits privacy, it can limit speech, movement, and more freedoms, which individuals and communities value. Already in this presentation, you can see I'm drawing a connection between what communities or individuals want and what the for-profit companies actually providing them. So in someone's mind, within a market, there's this assumption that I'm giving money to a company and I'm getting something in return. You go to a shop and you buy a chocolate bar and you like the taste of that chocolate bar. So, you buy the chocolate bar again. We have lots of people who are giving money to corporations and investing in corporations that are not providing people with services at all. We are the service that the company is providing to other clients. So the transaction is happening between a company and other people who are buying our data. We're not the ones who are transacting with the corporation at all. So that's a really important way to frame how for-profit surveillance creeps into even the most regular of apps. And one good example is these periods tracking apps. You've just had abortion laws in the United States that have been passed, right? If these companies have an incentive to make money, they can sell the data from their periods tracking apps to legislators and private firms that want to crack down on people who are going for abortions which have been made illegal. And the company wouldn't think twice about doing that because its bottom line is to make money. Now, all of us as users, we're just trying to track people are just trying to track their periods. They don't know that their data might be sold, and then they could be in serious danger, vulnerable communities. Okay, so that's a snapshot of those trends. But let's talk about the future and what we're heading toward. So first thing, there's a concept called Internet of Things. It means your washing machine talks to your computer, which talks to your phone, everything in all devices interconnected. And then there's cloud computing, which is effectively everything's online. So you don't store things in hard drives, which are only you and your computer can see it. Now you store it on a server, because what the cloud is, it's a nice creative name, but effectively it is a server. It is another computer where a lot of things are being stored on, and they can see what's there. It's much more difficult to see what's on your hard drive, but what's on the cloud is much easier for these people that host the service to see. So the combination of those two things means that it's easier for tech corporations to get a holistic data set for each individual, because they know when you're doing your washing, and they know what you're watching on your computer, what shows you like, Netflix knows, and they know what you're busy searching, not to be fear-mongering, but if everything of yours is on the cloud, the pictures you're taking, which restaurants you visit, they can create a really great profile for each individual, which is a combination of the Internet of Things and cloud computing. It's the dream for people that want to collect data and able to survey that. You can be surveyed even if you personally don't opt into any of these services. An example of this is an Apple AirTag. So how Apple AirTags work is Apple AirTags connect with Apple devices that have opted into the general service around you. So let's say someone slips an AirTag into your pocket, right? And you walk through an area where other people use Apple devices. They can track your movement and, as you're moving to the cinema and whatever. Now, you have not opted into an Apple device. You have not opted into being tracked. But the very fact that other people have allowed AirTags, and they use it to find their phone, it's innocent kind of That's what the corporation tells you. You can just use this AirTag to find your phone, but it can be used nefariously to create patterns of movement for anyone. And you don't even have to be an Apple user to be someone that an AirTag can track if someone just slips in your pocket or something. And there's lots of reports of that you see online. So not only are people who are opting into corporations being surveyed, just anyone is being surveyed, even if you don't opt into a corporation, obviously. Surveillance is becoming so sophisticated and integral to the technology we're using. I've been giving examples of people who are tracking their periods, who are just writing emails, who are, turning on their washing machine. These are just everyday things that you're doing. You're not even thinking twice about the data you're putting into these services. It's become so second nature to you to put in data into services, online payments, whatever, really, that it's become so integrated that it's so difficult to regulate away because it seems to become necessary to the ways in which we live. And it's so sophisticated and it keeps changing that regulations can't even keep up with the various ways in which people are collecting data. Quite obviously, some of it is done so secretly that even if you were to create a regulation, they would just still collect the data anyway, even though the regulation exists. So the second thing is that corporations are more powerful than governments in this respect. Governments do pass weak policies as well. So GDPR in Europe, even our Promotion of Access to Information Act and PAPAIA, they're very weak laws to start off with because of the lobby and various reasons. Corporations also pay the government to make sure laws are weak. But I'd wager even if the laws were stronger, corporations just wouldn't respect them because at the end of the day, we're all using Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. Their immense power and control over us makes it easy for them to overrule what local governments are doing, especially governments outside of the US. The South African government doesn't have much teeth against these large tech corporations. So the next thing that's going to happen is as more companies get really good at surveillance, the competition will drive companies to take more risks to outcompete other corporations. So if there's many corporations collecting data and a client wants to buy data, they're going to buy the best data set. So corporations will try to be more invasive so that their data can outcompete other corporations who are also collecting. So you might think, the corporation is not collecting that much, but eventually the profit incentive is going to force corporations to become more and more invasive and to do things which are very unethical, and they're going to become more and more dishonest. If every corporation told you that they're collecting data, you might not use that corporation and use a different one. So now the for-profit motive means corporations will lie to you. It also means they'll try their best to hide data collection, in innocent astrology chart apps and stuff like that, so that you don't actually know that you're giving personal information to a client, because the more aware you are of the process, you're less likely to give that information. Next, data will be used to target vulnerable groups, for instance, undocumented migrants. South Africa is starting to see a lot of increase in xenophobia, especially of the structural kind. And more laws are being passed. We've just opened up a border patrol right now. They're doing raids. Corporations are gonna want to get into this because it can make their money. We've got something called Operation Dudula, which is it's really grown in strength. First, it was Put South Africa First, which was mostly an online movement, but Operation Dudula is a physical movement. Now, if you want to make money as a corporation, you might want to tap into xenophobia as a means to make money. And so you might want to map out where are undocumented migrants, where they're traveling, try to collect that data, sell it to someone who's xenophobic. I think of this as an example. If I'm a company and I can tell you where all the foreign-owned shops are in your local community, and you just have to pay me a fee, there'd be people who want to buy that kind of data. So if you're an undocumented migrant using an innocent app, but you're giving off information, eventually that information can be used against you, etc. People seeking abortions, political opposition, far-left organizations. So even if you don't mind your data being collected as an individual, the bottom line is that data collection is going to harm vulnerable communities first. And the general infrastructure of data collection will be used against the vulnerable. Technology is also going to be more and more controlled by big Western corporations because they're just better at data collection than local companies. So because big tech can collect better, they outcompete, they absorb local tech corporations and they entrench themselves in local communities. So if you have to choose between using a social network, which is international and is customized and whatever, and like a little social network that was just launched in your own country, you're probably going to use the large international social network. There's more people there. It's a better service. It's got more features, things like that. So big tech is going to end up ruling in countries around the world. And we call that digital colonialism, which is when the social and economic digital sphere of a country is controlled by a different nation. Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, those are not South African companies. Those are US-based companies which control how we see the internet and how we experience the digital world. All right, the final thing that's going to happen is the whole point of technology will cease to be about communities, connection, freedom, curiosity, and all the nice things that we as communities use the internet for. The point of technology will be data collection. And this will affect what tech looks like, who makes decisions, who has power, and why we even have technology in the first place. So, I mean, what can we do about this? What are the alternatives? The first are what we call encrypted services. So encrypted services prevent the ability for data to even be shared at all. I won't go into the full exhaustive list. Michael Quitt actually has created a nice list of alternatives that you can use, and we'll continue to update that. Two, there's free and open source software. So if we must collect data, sometimes we need to collect data like for petitions, polls, newsletters, things like that. That is data collection. You can use free or libre open source software. Now, free software in this context implies that the user or community has freedom to use, copy, study, and change what data is being collected. So it doesn't mean free in the sense of monetary cost. It means free in the sense of freedom. It's more transparency. So a service will tell you exactly what data is being collected, and you can actually see it in their source code, how the service operates. So they can't just hide it behind the API, right? So right now, for-profit companies, you can't actually see what data they're collecting because it's proprietary software. It's hidden behind intellectual property rights, and you can't actually see what they're doing. But with free or libre open source software, you can see everything. So that transparency means that they can't secretly collect data without you knowing what they're collecting. So if we are to collect data, so encrypted services is best, but if we are to collect, then at the best, it should be free and open source software. Then finally, we need public decentralized technology or tech commons. If a community has control over technology rather than private individuals, they can prevent data collection from occurring in the first place. Any centralized company could pretend to not be collecting data, but behind the scenes, they strike deals. So DuckDuckGo is a search engine. It's also got a browser that's supposed to be privacy focused. But recently we found out that they've got exceptions with Bing, LinkedIn, and Microsoft to allow trackers on their browser application. So this is meant to be this big company that we're all trusting to be privacy focused, and it's got a reputation for being privacy focused. But we found out recently that they aren't as privacy focused as we thought because they're a small centralized company. That's another thing they'll do. Companies will pretend to be about privacy because they know it's a new up and coming wave, but behind the scenes they aren't. So we do need decentralized public owned technology to prevent data collection from happening. We can't just trust some do good company to do good, right? So finally, why should you migrate? Why should you use encrypted services or these tech alternatives? Well, the first is someone's got to start. The most of the people in the world right now are using the big tech companies, and we who are more knowledgeable about these issues and care about social change in the world, we can be the first ones to migrate, and eventually they might follow. Secondly, some people really need these services, like a journalist, for instance, reporting on an issue that a government or a company doesn't want out there is going to need to use an encrypted service. So I was talking about vulnerable groups earlier, people who are seeking abortions, undocumented migrants, they're going to need encrypted communication. So if we are all using encrypted communication, then they're safer for a few reasons. Firstly, if everyone's using an encrypted communication, then it's difficult for the government or private company to know who's the undocumented migrant. But let's say it's only undocumented migrants using a particular service. It kind of gives it away that, they're the ones using this service. It's sort of the dark web problem. You've got lots of people who are using encrypted services to do illegal things like, selling guns and human trafficking and stuff. And if they're the only ones who use that thing gets known as a thing that's done by those people. So it's the same thing. If the only people using encrypted services are vulnerable communities, kind of makes it obvious who the vulnerable communities are. So if everyone adopts something, it also protects the people that do need to use it. So even if you don't really have things that you think you need to be protecting and all of that, you migrating helps other people out. It means that we can actually defeat big tech. Remember, big tech is not just about digital control. I mean, Bill Gates is buying up farmland. Bill Gates is the largest farm owner in the world right now. The revenue that big tech gets can be used to entrench really bad things around the world in so many different other ways. So it's not just about the control of technology. We need to defeat big tech to fight climate change, for instance. So we can also defeat big tech by migrating, and then more numbers just makes these services more likely to succeed. I also feel like as a community, there are things we want. That's what I've been talking about this whole presentation. The best way for us to get these things we want is to do it ourselves and not to rely on someone else to do it for us. So that's my presentation. Yeah.